My father sold me for $3. On a freezing night in a dusty frontier town, a drunken man shoves his own daughter onto the saloon floor, trading her life for the price of whiskey. The crowd laughs until the doors slam open. A mountain man steps through the smoke, throws down a pouch of gold, and growls, "You're worth millions to me." But saving her is only the beginning. Behind the lamplight waits a sheriff with cold iron keys, a gambler with forged papers, and a town ready to turn a blind eye. And in the snowbound mountains, whispers of a hidden spring and broken treaty promises threaten to tear them apart. One man's grief and one girl's faith collide in a fight for land, justice, and the truth of what a life is really worth. Will frontier law destroy them both? Or will mercy and faith carve out a new family in the wilderness? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The cold wind howled outside the saloon windows as Daniel McGraw guided Anna through the swinging doors and into the bitter winter night. Snow crunched beneath their boots, and Anna's thin shawl offered little protection against the biting cold. Her breath came out in small white clouds as she tried to keep pace with Daniel's long strides. Daniel's weathered face was hard as granite in the dim light of the town's oil lamps. His grip on Anna's arm wasn't cruel, but it was firm enough to keep her moving through the deepening snow. Behind them, the saloon's warm glow and raucous noise faded into the darkness. Anna's heart hammered in her chest. Was this tall stranger truly her savior, or had she merely traded one form of danger for another? She stole quick glances at his face, trying to read his intentions in the shadows. Cast by his wide-brimmed hat, the mountain man's boots left deep prints in the fresh snow as he led them away from the town's main street. Anna noticed his coat was warm but sturdy, and a rifle was slung across his back. His beard was flecked with gray, and deep lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into mountain sunlight. "Where?" Anna's voice cracked, and she cleared her throat before trying again. "Where are you taking me, sir?" Daniel's pace slowed slightly, and his grip on her arm loosened. "Got a wagon just past the livery stable," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "You'll freeze solid in those thin clothes. Got some blankets there." They rounded the corner of the stable, and Anna saw a simple wagon with two sturdy horses stamping their hooves in the cold. True to his word, several thick wool blankets were folded in the back. Daniel finally released her arm and reached for one of the blankets. He shook it out and held it toward her, his movements careful as if approaching a spooked deer. "Here, wrap up good." Anna took the blanket with trembling hands, pulling it tight around her shoulders. The wool was rough but warm, and she felt some feeling return to her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Ain't right," Daniel muttered, more to himself than to her. Treating any human being like they're worth no more than the price of a bottle of whiskey. He turned to face her fully, and Anna saw something flash in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "You got any other kin nearby, girl?" Anna shook her head, fighting back tears that threatened to freeze on her cheeks. "My mother. She passed last spring. Fever took her. My father." She couldn't finish the sentence, the betrayal too fresh and raw. Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of her father. "Well, can't leave you here. Town ain't safe for you now." He gestured to the wagon. "I'm headed up into the mountains. Got a cabin there, about 2 days' ride. You're welcome to come along. Get yourself sorted out." Anna hesitated, weighing her options. The town had never been truly welcoming to her, with her mixed blood and her mother's ways. Now, after what had happened in the saloon, she knew she could never walk these streets without shame. But following a stranger into the mountains, as if reading her thoughts, Daniel spoke again, his voice softer now. "I know you got no reason to trust me, girl, But I swear on my wife's grave, I mean you no harm. Sometimes the Lord puts us in places where we can help others, even when we ain't looking to. The mention of the Lord caught Ana's attention. Her mother had taught her about faith, had sung her hymns in both Apache and English. She studied Daniel's face in the dim light, searching for any sign of deception. Instead, she saw only weariness and a hint of kindness in his weather-worn features. "My name is Ana," she said finally, lifting her chin with what dignity she could. Muster, a ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. "Ana," he repeated, nodding. "Well then, Ana, what do you say? Mountain air's clean, if nothing else. Might help wash away some of tonight's ugliness." Snow continued to fall around them, and in the distance, a coyote called into the night. Ana pulled the blanket tighter and thought of her mother's words about following the path the Creator set before you, even when it led in unexpected directions. "Yes," she said quietly but firmly, "I will come with you." Daniel nodded once, then helped her climb into the wagon. He added another blanket over her lap and checked that she was secure before taking up the reins. The horses seemed eager to move, their breath steaming in the cold air. As they pulled away from the stable, Ana looked back at the town one last time. The saloon's windows still glowed with lamplight, but it seemed dim and small now, like a memory fading into the past. Ahead lay the mountains, their snow-covered peaks lost in the darkness, but promising something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The frozen boards of the walkway creaked under their boots as Daniel led Ana away from the saloon. Lamplight from shop windows cast long shadows across the snow-covered street. Ana's steps were stiff and hesitant, her shoulders rigid beneath her thin shawl. Every few steps, she glanced at Daniel's hand on her arm, as if expecting his gentle grip to suddenly turn cruel. The livery stable loomed ahead, its weathered walls offering some shelter from the bitter wind. The smell of hay and horses drifted through the cold air. Daniel's mount, a sturdy bay gelding, stood where he'd left it earlier, stamping its hooves against the cold. "Here now," Daniel said softly, releasing Ana's arm. He moved to the horses, sighed and cupped his hands together, creating a step. "Put your foot here, I'll help you up." Ana stared at his offered hands, uncertainty written across her features. The light from a nearby lamp caught the tears frozen on her cheeks. "I won't hurt you, girl," Daniel assured her, his voice gruff but kind. "Just helping you mount, that's all." After a moment's hesitation, Ana placed her boot in his cupped hands. Daniel lifted her smoothly, helping her settle sideways on the saddle, her skirts arranged as modestly as possible. The leather creaked as he swung up behind her, gathering the reins in his calloused hands. The horse's breath came out in great white clouds as they started down the street. Snow crunched beneath its hooves, and Ana sat stiffly, trying to keep space between herself and Daniel's chest. Through frosted windows, curious faces appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Whispers followed them down the street. "That's McGraw's horse. The half-breed girl. What's he planning to?" Ana's shoulders hunched with each whispered comment, but she kept her chin high, just as her mother had taught her. The last lights of town grew dim behind them as they approached the outskirts. Here, the snow lay pristine and untouched, glowing faintly in the starlight. "Sir," Ana said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what do you want with me?" Her hands clutched the saddle horn tightly. "I've seen men act kind before, only two." She couldn't finish the thought. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Only the sound of the horse's breathing and the creak of leather breaking the night's stillness. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sorrows. "Lost my wife and daughter to fever 5 winters ago," he said. "Ain't got no family left. Wasn't planning to have any again, neither." He adjusted the reins in his hands. "But seeing you in there, being sold like so much firewood. No human deserves that shame. Couldn't stand by and watch it happen. What will you do with me? Aina asked, her voice stronger now. Got a cabin up in the mountains, Daniel replied. Good solid place. Warm. Safe. You can stay there long as you need. Get your bearings. Make your own choice about where life takes you next. Aina turned slightly, studying his face in the starlight. Just like that? You'd offer shelter to a stranger? Sometimes the Lord puts us where we're needed, Daniel said simply. Even when we ain't looking to be needed. The mention of the Lord made Aina think of her mother's prayers, sung in Apache and English. She sat straighter in the saddle, weighing her options. The town behind them had never truly been home, and now it held only betrayal and shame. The mountains ahead were unknown, but they offered at least the promise of dignity. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted quietly. Then we'll head to the cabin, Daniel said. Get you proper warm clothes first chance we get. As their horse carried them further into the darkness, two figures watched from the shadows of the last building in town. Sheriff Cutter spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow, his badge catching the faint starlight. Ain't right, the gambler muttered beside him. That girl was fair sold. We all witnessed it. McGraw's got no right, Cutter agreed, his voice hard with anger. Man can't just ride in here and take what's legally traded. There's law to consider. What you planning to do about it, Sheriff? Cutter watched the horse and its two riders disappear into the darkness. His hand rested on his gun belt, thumb stroking the worn leather. McGraw's got himself a weakness now, he said slowly. Man living alone in the mountains, he's hard to pressure. But now, he smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Now he's got something to lose. The gambler nodded, understanding. Girl could be mighty useful leverage. Indeed she could, Cutter agreed. Indeed she could. The mountain trail wound ever higher as Daniel guided his horse through deepening snow. 3 hours had passed since they'd left town, and the winter night pressed close around them. Massive pines stood sentinel on either side, their branches sagging under white burdens. The wind cut sharp as a knife through Aina's thin clothes, making her shiver against Daniel's chest. The horse plodded steadily onward, its hooves breaking through crusty snow. Each step brought a soft crunch that echoed in the gathering darkness. Aina's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, before everything had changed at the saloon. Her head felt light, and she swayed slightly in the saddle. Daniel's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. Whoa there, he said, pulling the horse to a stop beside a frozen creek. Ice-covered branches clicked together in the wind. Time we took a rest. He dismounted first, then helped Aina down. Her legs trembled as they hit the ground, and she had to grip the saddle to stay upright. Daniel pretended not to notice, preserving her dignity as he rummaged in his saddlebags. Here, he said, offering her a strip of dried beef. Ain't much, but it'll keep your strength up. Aina accepted the jerky with cold-numbed fingers. Thank you, she whispered, the words forming a white cloud in the frigid air. She bit into the tough meat, trying not to seem too eager despite her. Hunger. Daniel leaned against a snow-laden pine, chewing his own piece of jerky. In the deepening twilight, his face looked carved from stone, weathered by years and sorrows. Served in the war, he said suddenly, his voice quiet but carrying in the still air. Under Grant, saw things no man should see. Aina listened, watching him from the corner of her eye as she ate. The jerky was salty and good, bringing some warmth back to her body. Came west after with my Mary and our little girl. His voice grew softer. Fever took them both. 5 winters passed. Buried them under the aspens near the cabin. He fell silent, lost in memory. Aina said nothing, but her free hand moved to touch the small leather pouch at her neck. her own mother's final gift. She understood loss, but she wasn't ready to share her pain. Not yet. The wind moaned through the pines like a mourning song. A wolf's howl split the darkness, closer than comfort. Another answered from the ridge above. Daniel straightened, suddenly alert. "Best get moving," he said, helping Aina back into the saddle. "They're hunting tonight." The trail grew steeper, switching back and forth across the mountainside. Aina's teeth chattered despite her efforts to stay still. The wolves called to each other in the darkness, their voices echoing off rocky slopes. Daniel's horse picked up its pace, sensing the predator's dot just when Aina thought she couldn't endure the cold any longer. A warm yellow light appeared through the trees. Daniel's cabin stood in a small clearing, snow piled high against its logs. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. A small barn squatted nearby, its door secured against the weather. Daniel said simply. Guiding the horse to a halt, he helped Aina down, then led the horse to the barn. "Wait by the cabin," he instructed. "Won't be but a minute to settle him." Aina stood in the snow, hugging herself against the cold as Daniel disappeared into the barn with his mount. The cabin's single window glowed with lamplight, and she could see a fire burning in the hearth through the glass. Another wolf howled, closer now, making her jump. The barn door creaked, and Daniel emerged, carrying his saddlebags. He strode to the cabin and opened the door, gesturing Aina inside. Warmth washed over her as she stepped through the doorway. The cabin's interior was simple but solid. Rough-hewn log walls glowed in the firelight, and worn plank floors spoke of years of careful maintenance. A pot of something savory simmered on the iron stove, and a neat table with 2 chairs stood ready for supper. A curtained alcove in one corner presumably hid a bed, while shelves lined with provisions and tools covered the walls. "Stew's been simmering all day," Daniel said, hanging his coat on a peg. "Sit yourself down while I dish it up." Aina remained, standing, taking in what would now be her refuge. This room, these walls, this stranger, they represented safety, but also uncertainty. Her mother had taught her to trust in God's plan, but understanding it was another matter entirely. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf called to its pack. Aina touched her mother's pouch again, drawing strength from its familiar presence. Then she moved to the table and sat down, ready to begin. Whatever path lay ahead, morning sunlight filtered through the frosted window panes, casting diamond patterns across the cabin's plank floor. Aina woke to the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood outside. She sat up on the small cot Daniel had arranged behind a curtain, her blankets pulled tight against the morning chill. The main room stood quiet and still. Daniel's bed, tucked into its own alcove, was already empty and neatly made. Aina smoothed her skirts and began to explore her new surroundings in the clear light of day. Everything had its place. Cooking pots hung from iron hooks. Dried herbs dangled from rafters, and shelves held supplies for the long winter ahead. But a fine layer of dust-coated surfaces that needed a woman's touch. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. A clean home shows respect for God's blessings. On the stone mantel, partially hidden behind a copper coffee pot, sat a leather-bound Bible. Aina ran her finger along its spine, leaving a clean line in the dust. The book was well-worn, its pages yellowed with age, but clearly untouched for some time. She found a rag in a drawer and began to clean, working methodically as her mother had taught her. The familiar motions brought comfort, wiping down shelves, sweeping the rough floor, straightening what needed straightening. By the time heavy boots stomped snow from their saws outside, she had brought a new shine to the cabin's interior. Daniel ducked through the doorway, his breath still smoking from exertion. He paused, taking in the changes, then nodded once before hanging his coat. "Didn't have to do all that," he said gruffly. "I wanted to," Anna replied. She hesitated, then gestured to the Bible. "Do you read from it often?" A shadow crossed Daniel's weathered face. "Used to," he said shortly. Before Mary and Sarah, he turned away, busying himself at the stove. "Breakfast needs making." Anna watched him measure cornmeal into a pot of boiling water, his movements efficient but tense. She recognized the wall of grief he'd thrown up. She had her own, after all. Carefully, she set the table with 2 tin plates, giving him space to work through whatever memories she'd stirred. The cornmeal mush steamed in their bowls, thick and filling. Anna waited until they'd both eaten several bites before speaking again. "How long might I stay?" she asked softly. "I don't want to be a burden." Daniel looked up, studying her face. "Winter's settling in hard," he said. "Trails will be dangerous until spring thaw. You're welcome here till then. If you are mine to stay, I can earn my keep," Anna said quickly. "I know how to cook and clean. My mother taught me about small game too, rabbits, squirrels. I could learn to trap them." Surprise flickered across Daniel's features. "Didn't expect that," he admitted. "Most town girls don't take to mountain ways." "I'm not most town girls," Anna said quietly, thinking of her mother's Apache teachings. Daniel nodded slowly. "Reckon you're not." He pushed back from the table. "Well then, might as well start your training. Got some snares to check this morning." They bundled up against the cold, Daniel lending Anna a spare coat that hung nearly to her knees. Outside, the world sparkled white and clean, unmarked except for Daniel's earlier tracks to the woodpile. Pine boughs drooped under their snowy burden, and their boots crunched through fresh powder as Daniel led the way into the forest. "Watch where I step," he instructed. "Trail's treacherous when hidden." Anna followed carefully, noting how he tested each step on the sloping ground. The air was crisp and sharp in her lungs, carrying the scent of pine sap and wood smoke. After 15 minutes of steady climbing, Daniel stopped beside a young aspen. "Here's the first snare," he said, kneeling to brush away snow. "See how the wire's set? Rabbit runs through here regular, following its trail to the creek." Anna crouched beside him, studying the cleverly arranged trap. "My mother showed me something similar, but with twisted bark cord." Daniel glanced at her with new interest. "That so? Well, wire's more durable, but the principle's the same." He demonstrated how to check and reset the snare, his big hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate work. They checked 5 more snares that morning, finding 2 rabbits that would make a good stew. Daniel showed Anna how to field dress them properly, nodding approval at her steady hands. On the walk back, he pointed out other signs she should learn: deer tracks, fox markings, the difference between pine varieties. Though they remained cautious with each other, something had shifted. Anna felt it in the way Daniel slowed his stride to match hers, and how he took time to explain things she needed to know. And Daniel seemed to sense it too, his gruff manner softening when she asked questions or offered observations of her own. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had climbed high, making the snow gleam like scattered diamonds. A thin thread of belonging had begun to weave itself between them, fragile as a spider's silk, but present all the same. The days melted together like snowflakes on warm glass. Winter storms howled across the mountain peaks, rattling the cabin's shutters and forcing Daniel and Anna to remain indoors. The weather turned fierce enough that even checking the nearest trap lines became dangerous, leaving them to make do with what supplies they had stored. Daniel settled into his usual chair by the fire, bits of broken traps scattered across his lap. His weathered hands worked methodically, testing springs and mending broken chains. The familiar task kept his fingers busy while his thoughts wandered. Carried along by the soft melody that filled the cabin, Aina moved about the kitchen space, stirring a pot of rabbit stew that simmered over the cook fire. As she worked, she hummed Apache lullabies her mother had taught her, the gentle notes rising and falling like wind through summer grass. The song spoke of stars and seasons, of Creator's love and mother's comfort, though Daniel couldn't understand the words. He found himself pausing more often, trap forgotten in his hands as he listened. The tunes reminded him of Mary, how she used to sing hymns while rocking little Sarah to sleep. The memory ached, but somehow Aina's songs made it easier to bear. She had already mended 3 of his torn shirts, her neat stitches far tidier than his crude attempts. The cabin felt different with her there, warmer somehow, despite the howling storm outside. Even the shadows seemed softer when she sang. "Supper's ready," Aina announced, ladling the thick stew into wooden bowls. She noticed Daniel's slight wince as he pushed himself up from his chair. His right leg dragged slightly as he made his way to the table. After they'd eaten, Aina cleared her throat. "Your leg is troubling you more than usual." Daniel shrugged, but couldn't hide another grimace as he shifted in his seat. "Old war wound. Axe up in the cold." "Let me look at it," Aina said firmly. "My mother taught me about caring for injuries." Daniel started to refuse, but Aina had already risen to gather clean cloths and her mother's small medicine pouch. Her quiet determination reminded him so much of Mary that he found himself giving in. "It's not pretty," he warned, as he rolled up his pant leg, revealing an old bullet wound just above his knee. The scar tissue was red and swollen from the cold. Aina worked with gentle efficiency, washing the leg with warm water and herbs from her pouch. Her small hands moved carefully over the injury, checking for heat and tenderness. The wound never healed quite right, she observed. Field hospital was overwhelmed, Daniel explained gruffly. Did what they could. As she began wrapping the knee with strips of clean cloth, Aina's voice grew soft. "My mother used to say that healing comes in many forms." She would quote from Psalms while tending injuries. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Used to know that one. Used to pray every day, in fact. His voice grew rough. But after Mary and Sarah took sick, after I buried them, couldn't see the point anymore. Aina's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their careful wrapping. "Faith can be like this wound," she said quietly. "It leaves scars when it's hurt, but that doesn't mean it can't heal. Even out here in the wilderness, Creator is present. My mother taught me to see him in the sunrise, hear him in the wind through the pines." Usually, Daniel dismissed any mention of faith with a grunt or change of subject. But tonight, watching the firelight play across Anna's focused face, so young yet so wise in her own way, he found himself considering her words. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman," he said at last. She was. Aina tied off the bandage with practiced fingers. "She taught me that loss doesn't mean we're abandoned. Sometimes it's when we're most broken that light finds new ways to shine through." Daniel didn't respond, but neither did he turn away. He sat quietly, watching the flames dance in the hearth, while a single tear traced down his weathered cheek. Aina pretended not to notice. Busying herself with putting away her supplies, the wind continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. As Aina resumed her gentle humming, Daniel closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest stirring of something he'd thought forever lost. Not quite faith returned, but perhaps the possibility of it. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across both their faces as the long winter night drew in around them. Neither spoke again, but the silence between them had grown comfortable, like a well-worn blanket wrapped around tired shoulders. Morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm's fury spent at last. Sunlight sparkled across the snow-draped valley like scattered diamonds, while icicles dripped steadily from the cabin's eaves. The world seemed made new, washed clean by the passing tempest. Daniel stood at the cabin door, breathing in the sharp winter air. Storms broke, he called over his shoulder to Anna. Might be a good day to show you some proper mountain skills. Anna appeared beside him, wrapping a worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes widened at the transformed landscape. Everything looks different, she breathed. That's mountain weather for you. Daniel pulled on his heavy coat, got some fishing gear ready. Thought we might try the lake. Should be frozen solid by now. They set out through the deep snow, Daniel breaking trail while Anna followed in his footsteps. The morning air bit at their faces, but the sky stretched endless blue above them. Their breath came out in white puffs as they made their way down to the frozen lake. Daniel showed Anna how to chip through the thick ice with a heavy metal spike. To make the hole just right, he explained, demonstrating the careful strikes. Too small, and you can't pull the fish through. Too large, and it's dangerous. Anna watched intently, then tried her hand at cutting a second hole. Her smaller strikes took longer, but she worked with determined patience until she created a proper fishing spot. Daniel nodded approvingly. Now comes the waiting part, he said, showing her how to work the short ice fishing line. They settled on upturned buckets, watching their lines dip into the dark water below. After catching 2 good-sized trout, Daniel suggested they gather more firewood. The deep snow made the work challenging, but necessary. He demonstrated proper technique with the axe, then supervised as Anna tried splitting smaller logs. Keep your stance wide, he advised. Let the weight of the axe head do the work. Anna was just getting the hang of it when she stepped backward and suddenly plunged waist-deep into a snowdrift. Her startled yelp turned to laughter as she flailed helplessly in the powder. Daniel couldn't help chuckling as he reached down to haul her out. Reckon that drift was deeper than it looked, he said, brushing snow from her coat. Just a little. Anna's eyes sparkled with mirth, her cheeks rosy from cold and laughter. It was the first time Daniel had heard her truly laugh, the sound bright as summer bells. That evening, they roasted the trout over the hearth fire, the fish sizzling and filling the cabin with savory smells. Anna had seasoned them with herbs from her mother's medicine pouch, the familiar scents bringing back memories for them both. As they ate, Daniel found himself talking about his childhood back east. Had a farm in Pennsylvania, he said, studying the flames. Wasn't much, but the soil was good. My pa grew corn and wheat, kept some dairy cows. Ma had the finest vegetable garden in the county. Anna listened intently, sensing his need to share these precious memories. When he fell quiet, she spoke softly of her own past. My mother taught me to grind corn in the traditional way, she said, her fingers tracing patterns on her cup. She would sing prayers while we worked, songs about blessing the food, thanksgiving for Creator's gifts. Said it made the corn taste sweeter when it was ground with gratitude. Daniel nodded slowly. Sounds like she was a special woman. She was. Anna's voice grew wistful. I miss her songs the most. The way she could make any task feel sacred, even the simplest things. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in memories of family long gone. The fire popped and crackled, casting warm shadows on the log walls. Finally, Anna spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I never properly thanked you for that night in the saloon. She swallowed hard. Before then, I thought. I believed I was worthless. That maybe my father was right to sell me for so little. Daniel set down his cup, his weathered face etched with emotion. Anna, he said roughly, you listen to me now. What I said that night wasn't just words. You are priceless, worth more than all the gold in these mountains. He paused, struggling to find the right words. Truth is, you've been a gift to my lonely soul. Brought light back to this cabin I thought was dead forever. Tears glistened in Aina's eyes, but she held her head high, just as she had that night in the saloon. This time, though, pride replaced defiance, pride in who she was, in her heritage, in her own immeasurable worth. The fire burned low as they sat together, two wounded souls finding healing in their unlikely family. Outside, stars wheeled across the crystal-clear mountain sky, while inside, the cabin glowed with warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth. But inside, the cabin glowed with the hearth. Week of peaceful routine had settled over the mountain cabin when their supplies began running low. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Daniel hitched his horses to the heavy wooden sled. Aina wrapped herself in extra blankets, watching her. Breath cloud in the frigid air while Daniel secured their empty supply bags. Settlement's about 3 hours by sled, Daniel explained, helping her onto the wooden bench. Smaller than the town where I found you, but they've got a decent general store. The runners whispered through fresh snow as they descended from the high country. Aina huddled close to Daniel for warmth, watching the winter landscape scroll past. Pine boughs hung heavy with white, and rabbit tracks dotted the pristine drifts. The sun climbed higher, making the snow sparkle like crushed glass dot by midday. They reached the settlement, a cluster of wooden buildings with smoke rising from stone chimneys. Daniel guided the sled to a hitching post outside the general store. Its windows glazed with frost. He helped Aina down, his expression growing stern. "Stay close," he muttered, holding the door for her. Warmth and the smell of coffee greeted them inside. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, stocked with dry goods, tools, and sundries. The floorboards creaked under their boots as they gathered their needed supplies: flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, lamp oil. But the store wasn't empty. Other customers paused their shopping, watching Aina with undisguised curiosity. Whispers followed them down the aisles. "That's Mikro's Indian girl. Heard he bought her off some drunk. Ain't natural, keeping her up there." Aina kept her eyes down, but her shoulders stayed straight and proud as she helped Daniel select supplies. The whispers grew louder, more hostile, until the bell over the door jangled. Heavy boots thumped on the wooden floor. Sheriff Amos Cutter filled the doorway, his badge catching the weak winter light. The gambler from the saloon lurked behind him, a nasty smile playing on his thin lips. "Well now, McGraw," the sheriff drawled, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "Fancy meeting you here." Daniel shifted slightly, putting himself between Aina and the lawman. "Something I can help you with, Sheriff?" "Matter of fact, there is." Cutter's eyes fixed on Aina. "Seems to me you're harboring stolen property." "Girl, that was legally purchased before you interfered." "She's not property," Daniel growled. "She's a person. Law says different." The sheriff's hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. "Got ourselves a legal bill of sale, don't we, Mr. Jenkins?" The gambler stepped forward, producing a crumpled paper from his vest pocket. $3, paid in full to her father. Makes her mine by rights. Aina's fingers dug into Daniel's coat sleeve, but she didn't make a sound. The other customers had backed away, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. "That paper ain't worth the ink it's printed with," Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You can't sell a human being." "Maybe not where you come from," Cutter smirked. "But out here, possession is 9/10 of the law. And I hear tell you've got yourself a nice little homestead up in the mountains. Be a shame if someone was to challenge your claim on account of harboring stolen goods." The threat hung heavy in the air. Daniel's hands clenched into fists, and the sheriff's fingers tightened on his gun belt. Now, gentlemen." A new voice cut through the tension. An elderly man in a preacher's collar stepped forward, his lined face creased with concern. "This is hardly the place for such discussions." "Sheriff, surely this matter can wait for another day?" Cutter held Daniel's gaze for a long moment before stepping back. "Just giving fair warning is all. Man ought to know when he's breaking the law." He jerked his head at the gambler. "Come on, Jenkins, we've made our point." They swaggered out, letting the door slam behind them. The preacher gave Daniel an apologetic look before shuffling away. Gradually, the other customers returned to their shopping. Though the whispers continued, Daniel quickly paid for their supplies, his movements sharp with barely contained anger. Anna helped load their purchases onto the sled, her hands trembling, despite the thick mittens she wore. The ride home seemed longer, darker, though the sun still shone on the snow. "I'm sorry," Anna finally whispered, her voice catching. "I never meant to bring trouble to you, to make you risk your home." Daniel reined the horses to a stop, turning to face her. "Now you listen good," he said firmly. "That badge-heavy fool and his gambler friend don't scare me none. I meant what I said. You're a person, not property, and I'll die before I let them take you back." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, drawing strength from his conviction. They rode on through the gathering dusk, the sled's runners, cutting twin grooves through the pristine snow, heading home to their cabin in the mountains while shadows lengthened. Behind them, the cabin felt smaller in the days following their encounter at the general store. Daniel paced more, checking his rifle and peering out windows. Anna's songs grew quieter, though she never stopped humming entirely while she worked. Their easy routine had gained a shadow, one that grew longer as December deepened. One morning, while Anna kneaded bread, Daniel cleared his throat. "Been thinking," he said, warming his hands by the cook stove. "Christmas is coming. Might be good to have some folks over." Anna's hands stilled in the dough. "Folks?" "Got a few neighbors scattered in these mountains. Good people." Daniel scratched his beard thoughtfully. The Petersons had a place 3 miles north. Henderson's about 4 miles east. Few others. Nothing fancy, just gathering for Christmas Eve. Anna's face brightened for the first time in days. "I could clean, make everything nice," she said, already looking around the cabin with new eyes. "Maybe decorate like Mama used to?" Daniel nodded, pleased to see her spark return. "Whatever you want. Got plenty of pine boughs outside." Over the next week, Anna transformed the cabin. She scrubbed every surface until the wood gleamed, hung fresh pine garlands above the windows, and saved precious flour to bake special treats. Daniel watched her work, remembering how his wife had once done the same. Though he kept that thought quiet in his heart, Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold. By late afternoon, sleigh bells jingled outside as their guests arrived. The Petersons came first, a weather-beaten farmer, his gentle wife, and their 3 children. The Hendersons followed with their teenage sons and a fiddle. More families trickled in until the cabin buzzed with voices and warmth. "Never seen this place so lively," Mrs. Peterson said, helping Anna set out cornbread and stew. "Does my heart?" "Good." Children played marbles by the hearth while the men swapped hunting stories. The Henderson boy tuned his fiddle, and soon music filled the cabin. Feet tapped on floorboards as couples danced in the cleared space by the door. "Anna should sing for us," Mrs. Henderson called out during a lull. "I heard tell she knows songs." Anna shrank back slightly, but encouraging voices joined in. Daniel gave her a gentle nod from his place by the fire. Taking a deep breath, Anna stepped forward. The fiddle player drew his bow across the strings, finding the familiar notes of Silent Night. Anna's clear voice rose, singing the first verse in English, just as her mother had taught her. Then, seamlessly, she wove in the Apache words her mother had sung to her as a child, the melody carrying both languages in perfect harmony. The cabin fell silent, except for her voice and the soft fiddle. The song spoke of peace, of holy nights, of mother and child, truths that needed no translation. Weather-roughened men wiped their eyes. Women held their children closer. Even the youngsters stopped their play, caught in the spell of Anna's voice. When the last note faded, silence held for a heartbeat before Mrs. Peterson sniffled loudly. "Well, if that wasn't the most beautiful thing I've heard since coming to these mountains," she declared, dabbing her eyes with her apron. "Amen to that," rumbled Mr. Henderson, his voice gruff with emotion. Daniel stood quietly by the hearth, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He watched as the women gathered around. Anna, praising her voice, sharing their own Christmas memories. The children resumed their games, but gentler now, including Anna's skirts as part of their safe territory. The evening continued with more music, more food, more stories. Neighbors who had arrived as strangers departed as friends, with promises to return. Each family hugged Anna goodbye, treating her no different than their own daughters. As the last sleigh bells faded into the night, Daniel and Anna stood in the doorway, watching snow drift down in the lantern light. "Thank you," Anna said softly, "for suggesting this, for everything." Daniel looked around the cabin, at the pine boughs she'd hung, the remnants of food she'd prepared, the warmth she'd brought to his lonely home. More than that, he saw how their neighbors had accepted her, how naturally she fit into this life they were building. "Reckon I'm the one who should be thankful," he replied. "Been a long time since this place felt like home." They stayed there a moment longer, watching the snow erase the sleigh tracks, while inside, the fire crackled and the pine boughs filled the air with Christmas sweetness. For the first time since the threats in town, Daniel felt true peace settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with friends beside them and faith renewed. The warmth of Christmas celebrations still filled the cabin. Pine boughs rustled softly overhead as neighbors shared final bites of cornbread and stories. Anna gathered empty plates, her dress swishing against rough floorboards, while Daniel stoked the fire against the deepening night chill. The pounding came without warning. 3 sharp strikes rattled the door in its frame, silencing all conversation. Children froze mid-play, marbles forgotten on the floor. "McGraw, open up!" Sheriff Cutter's voice cut through the peaceful evening like a knife. Daniel's hand moved toward his rifle, but he caught himself, glancing at the women and children. He crossed to the door, boots heavy on creaking boards, and pulled it open. Sheriff Cutter stood in the lamplight, snow dusting his shoulders. Behind him, the gambler from town smirked beneath his hat brim. 4 armed men flanked them, rifles ready. "Evening, folks," Cutter drawled, pushing past Daniel into the crowded room. His spurs jangled against the floor as he surveyed the gathering. "Having ourselves a nice Christmas party, are we?" Anna pressed back against the far wall, her fingers clutching her freshly sewn dress. The gambler's eyes found her immediately, his gaze making her shrink further into the shadows. "What do you want, Cutter?" Daniel's voice was low, dangerous. The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got here a legal receipt of sale for that girl." He held it up, the crude writing visible in the firelight. "You've been harboring stolen property, McGraw. That's a serious offense." "She ain't property," Daniel growled. "She's a human being. Law says different." The gambler stepped forward, tapping the paper. $3, paid fair and square. "She belongs in town, where she can be properly supervised." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Peterson opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, drawing his children closer. Mrs. Henderson wrung her hands in her apron, eyes downcast. "You're not taking her," Daniel said, moving to stand between Anna and the armed men. The sheriff nodded slightly. 2 deputies stepped forward, rifle butts raised. Daniel tried to dodge, but in the crowded space, he had nowhere to go. The first blow caught him in the shoulder, the second across his back. He stumbled, catching himself on the table edge. Anna screamed as rough hands seized her arms. "Daniel, please, help me." She struggled, but the gambler's grip was iron tight. Her dress tore at the shoulder as he dragged her toward the door. The sound of ripping fabric echoed in the suddenly silent cabin. "Stop this!" Daniel lunged forward, but more blows drove him to his knees. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye as deputies snapped iron shackles around his wrists. "Resisting arrest now, too," Cutter said, almost cheerfully. "That'll cost you, McGraw. Might even lose this nice cabin of yours." The neighbors pressed against the walls, faces pale in the firelight. No one moved to help as Aina was shackled and pushed outside into the snow. Daniel was hauled up by his chains and forced to follow. A prison wagon waited in the yard, its steel bars stark against the white landscape. Aina sobbed as she was thrust inside, her torn dress offering little protection against the bitter cold. Daniel was shoved in after her, landing hard on the frozen floorboards. "Folks best head home now," Sheriff Cutter announced to the wide-eyed faces in the doorway. "Nothing more to see here. Just justice being done." Sleigh bells began to jingle as neighbors hurriedly hitched their horses, avoiding each other's eyes. Children were bustled into blankets, their earlier laughter forgotten. One by one, the sleighs pulled away into the darkness, leaving tracks. In the fresh snow, Daniel managed to sit up despite his chains. Through the wagon's bars, he watched his neighbors flee, saw their shame and fear. His gaze caught Mr. Peterson's as the farmer passed. The man quickly looked away, snapping his reins. The prison wagon jerked into motion. Aina huddled against Daniel, shivering in her torn dress. The sound of their Christmas celebration still echoed in his mind. Her beautiful song, the children's laughter, the moment of perfect peace, now shattered like ice thawed as they passed the cabin. Daniel turned for one last look. Lamplight still glowed through the windows. Pine boughs still hung above the door. All the warmth they built there seemed to mock him now. But beneath his anger and pain, a fierce determination took root. He may be in chains, but he wasn't beaten. Not while Aina needed him. Not while injustice wore a badge and called itself law. His eyes met the sheriff's, and in that glare was a promise. This wasn't over. Justice, real justice, would have its day. The wagon rolled on through the snowy night, carrying them away from all they built together. Behind them, their cabin grew smaller and darker, until it was swallowed by the winter shadows. The winter morning sun cast harsh light on Main Street as the prison wagon rattled into town. Townsfolk emerged from shops and homes, drawn by the spectacle. Aina kept her eyes fixed on her lap, but she could hear their whispers growing louder, feel their stares burning through her torn Christmas dress. Sheriff Cutter yanked the wagon to a stop in front of the jail. "Step down nice and slow," he ordered, prodding Daniel with his rifle barrel. Daniel's chains clinked as he climbed down, his movements stiff from the cold ride. He tried to position himself between Aina and the growing crowd, but deputies pulled them apart. "Looks like the mountain man ain't so mighty now," someone shouted. Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Aina stumbled as the gambler grabbed her arm, her cheeks burning with shame. More jeers followed them down the street. A woman clutched her shawl tighter, hurrying her children inside. A man spat in the snow as they passed. "Please," Aina whispered to the gambler, "don't take me back there." But he only tightened his grip, steering her toward the saloon's swinging doors. The same saloon where her father had sold her weeks ago. The same tobacco-stained walls, the same stale whiskey smell that made her stomach turn. "Evidence has to be secured," Sheriff Cutter called out, his voice carrying down the street. "Can't have McGraw's stolen property wandering free." Daniel lunged against his chains. "She ain't property." A deputy's rifle butt caught him in the ribs, doubling him over. Aina cried out, but the gambler dragged her through the saloon doors before She could see more dot inside. He shoved her toward a corner. "Stay put," he growled. "Sheriff will decide what to do with you later." Ana sank to her knees on the rough floorboards. The saloon was empty this early, but soon it would fill with the same men who had laughed at her before. She closed her eyes, remembering the prayers her mother had taught her in Apache and English. "Dear God," she whispered, "please give us strength. Please don't let them win." In his cell, Daniel paced like a caged mountain lion. 7 steps one way, 7 steps back. The sheriff had taken everything but his clothes, belt, boots, even the small wooden cross he'd carried since the war. Through the barred window, he could see the saloon across the street. The thought of Ana there, unprotected, made his hands shake with rage and fear. He sank onto the thin mattress, head in his hands. How long had it been since he'd truly prayed? Since Sarah and little Mary died, he'd turned his back on faith. But now, "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "I ain't been much for talking to you lately, but that girl needs help. She's got a pure heart, and she believes in you something fierce. Don't let these men destroy that. Give me strength to protect her, or—" his voice cracked, "or take my life instead of hers." The cell door creaked. Daniel looked up to see Reverend Thompson, the elderly preacher who had intervened at the general store. He carried a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "Brought you something to eat," the preacher said softly, passing it through the bars. "And to tell you, I'm headed to the county seat tomorrow. There's something not right about that receipt they're waving around." "I aim to check the records myself." Daniel gripped the bars. "Much obliged, Reverend. But Ana, she's in that saloon. Night's coming. Those men—" "I know, son." The preacher's lined face was grave. Some folks in town are troubled by all this, but Cutter's got them scared. Been sheriff here 15 years, and he knows too many secrets. He glanced over his shoulder. "I'll do what I can. Keep praying." After the preacher left, Daniel broke the bread but couldn't eat. The winter sun was setting, painting the jail walls bloody red. Across the street, lamps flickered to life in the saloon windows. Raucous voices drifted through the evening air. 7 steps forward, 7 steps back. Each hour stretched like a year. In his mind, he saw Anna's face as she sang on Christmas Eve, so full of hope. He remembered her gentle hands tending his war wound, her quiet strength as she spoke of faith. "Hold on, girl," he whispered to the darkness. "Whatever it takes, I'll make this right." Through the long night, his prayers never ceased. Neither did his pacing. 7 steps forward, 7 steps back, waiting for dawn and whatever justice it might bring. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Townsfolk filled the benches, their hushed whispers echoing off whitewashed walls. The makeshift courtroom, usually reserved for property disputes and minor offenses, now held the weight of 2 lives in balance. Sheriff Cutter stood near the judge's desk, thumbs hooked in his belt, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. The gambler lounged nearby, occasionally flashing his crude receipt at curious onlookers. Their confidence filled the room like a foul wind. 2 deputies led Ana in from a side door. Her Christmas dress was wrinkled from sleeping in the saloon corner, but she held her head high. Dark circles ringed her eyes, yet something unbreakable burned in their depths. She scanned the crowd, searching for a friendly face among the sea of judgment. Minutes later, the main doors opened. Daniel stumbled through in chains, pushed roughly by his guards. Fresh bruises darkened his jaw, and his limp was worse than ever. Still, he straightened to his full height when he saw Ana, as if drawing strength from her presence. Their eyes met briefly across the room, exchanging silent courage. "Court's coming to order," announced the town clerk, a nervous man who kept glancing at the sheriff. "This here's a special session regarding the matter of stolen property and homestead violations. Sheriff Cutter stepped forward, unfolding a paper with theatrical flourish. Got us a simple case here. This man, he jabbed a finger at Daniel, took what weren't his. Got proof right here that the girl was legally purchased. Furthermore, he's been squatting on land that the courthouse doors burst open with a bang. Reverend Thompson hurried in, his gray hair disheveled, clutching a leather satchel to his chest. Stop these proceedings, he called out, voice stronger than his aged frame suggested. I have evidence that changes everything. Murmurs rippled. Through the crowd, the sheriff's face darkened. Now see here, Reverend. I rode all night from the county seat. The preacher continued, spreading documents on the judge's desk. These land grant papers show Daniel McGraw's homestead was legally deeded to him after his war service. 15 years ago, signed and sealed by territorial authorities. He pulled out more yellowed papers, and there's more. I found treaty records from 1863. Ana's grandfather, Chief Running Deer, signed agreements that gave his family legal claim to the springhead that feeds the creek on Daniel's property. Their rights were supposed to be protected. The room erupted in shocked conversation. Ana's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Daniel stared at the preacher, hardly daring to believe. That's nonsense. The sheriff sputtered, his face reddening. Some old Indian marks don't mean nothing against proper law. Those marks are legal treaties, Reverend Thompson said firmly. And this girl's heritage gives her more right to that land than any receipt written in a saloon. The gambler jumped up. Now wait just a minute. But the mood in the courthouse had shifted. People who had sat silent now stood, voices rising in protest. Them treaties was supposed to be honored. McGraw fought for the Union. That land's rightfully his. Ain't right. What was done to that girl? The sheriff tried to shout them down, but his authority was crumbling. Even his deputies looked uncertain, one quietly stepping away from Daniel's side, Ana, and Daniel's eyes met again across the chaotic room. In that moment, they both understood the truth. They weren't just two lost souls who found each other by chance. Their paths had been linked long ago, through ink on paper and promises made by those who came before. The very land itself had drawn them together, offering a chance at justice neither could have found alone. Order! Order in this court! The clerk pounded his gavel, looking bewildered by his own boldness. These documents need proper review. Sheriff Cutter, you'll stand down until I don't stand down for nobody. Cutter's hand dropped to his gun, but he froze as dozens of townspeople rose to their feet. The tide of public opinion had turned, and he found himself facing not sheep, but citizens awakened to justice. The Reverend stepped between them, his gentle voice carrying more weight. The law you claim to serve, Sheriff, cuts both ways. These papers prove it. The question is, will you honor what's right, or only what serves your greed? The gambler rose from his seat, face twisted with fury. Those papers ain't worth the ink they're printed with. Reverend's probably been up all night forging them himself. That's a lie, came a gravelly voice from the back of the courthouse. Old Jim Turner, a settler who'd been in the territory since before the war, pushed through the crowd. His weathered face bore the marks of 30 hard years on the frontier. I remember when Chief Running Deer signed them treaties. I was there. Another man stepped forward, Samuel Webb, formerly a clerk in the Army Quartermaster's office. I processed McGraw's land grant myself after his discharge. That's my signature right there on the witness line. Clear as day. The sheriff's confident smirk began to falter as more voices joined the chorus. Martha Wilson, who ran the dry goods store, spoke up from her seat. My late husband told me about them springs being promised to the Apache families. Said it wasn't. Right how they got pushed out. Whispers rippled through the courthouse like wind through prairie grass. The townspeople who had watched in fearful silence now turned to their neighbors, sharing long-held secrets and buried truths. "Them papers are real enough," declared Webb, adjusting his spectacles as he examined them. "That's territorial seal work I'd know anywhere. Can't be forged." The gambler's face had turned an ugly shade of purple. His hand crept toward his coat pocket. "No matter none what some dusty papers say, I bought that girl fair and square. $3 ain't fair payment for a human life," Daniel called out, his voice strong despite his chains. "And you know it." The gambler's eyes gleamed with desperate rage. His hand whipped out, drawing a small derringer. "I'll settle this my way." Several women screamed. But before anyone could move, Daniel launched himself forward, despite his shackles. His powerful frame slammed into the gambler, sending them both crashing into the judge's desk. They grappled for the weapon, Daniel's chains clanking as he wrestled. With his opponent dot, the gun went off with a deafening crack, the bullet splintering wood overhead. Daniel's large hands closed around the gambler's wrist, twisting until the derringer clattered to the floor. "Get him!" shouted someone in the crowd. 3 men rushed forward, pulling the cursing gambler away from Daniel. They held him firmly. As he thrashed and spat, the sheriff reached for his own weapon, but froze as he found himself facing dozens of angry faces. These weren't the same cowed townsfolk who had looked away from injustice for so long. These were citizens awakening to their own power, their own responsibility. "Now see here," Cutter blustered, but his voice had lost its authority. "This is still my town. This is our town," Martha Wilson cut in, rising to her feet. "And we're tired of your kind of law, Sheriff." The judge, a weak-willed man who had long bent to Cutter's influence, saw which way the wind was blowing. He cleared his throat nervously. "In light of this new evidence, I hereby declare the so-called sale null and void. The girl is free to go, and Mr. McRaw's property rights are to be fully respected." Anna, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing wonder, felt tears spring to her eyes. For the first time since her mother's death, she saw people standing up for what was right. Standing up for her. Sheriff Cutter's face had turned crimson. His hand fell from his gun belt as he backed toward the door. "This ain't over," he growled, but the threat in his voice rang hollow. "Oh, I reckon it is," said old Jim, and scattered. Laughter followed the sheriff's retreat. Someone found keys and unlocked Daniel's chains. The moment his hands were free, he crossed the room to Anna in 2 long strides. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her clear off her feet in a crushing embrace. "Listen, all of you," Daniel's voice rang out as he set Anna down, but kept one arm protectively around her shoulders. "This girl is my family now, my daughter in all but blood. Anyone who wants to harm her will answer to me." A cheer went up from the crowd. Anna buried her face in Daniel's coat, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. When she looked up, she saw smiles where there had been scowls, acceptance where there had been fear. The elderly preacher stepped forward, laying one hand on Anna's shoulder and one on Daniel's arm. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes it takes a mighty storm to clear the air and let truth shine through." The courthouse buzzed with conversation as people pressed forward to welcome Anna properly for the first time. Martha Wilson promised to help her pick out fabric for new dresses. Samuel Webb offered to file proper papers declaring her Daniel's legal ward. Even those who had turned away before now met her eyes with shame-faced smiles. The journey back, too. The cabin felt different somehow. Where silence had hung heavy before, friendly voices now filled the crisp mountain air. Neighbors who had stood mute at the Christmas gathering now walked alongside Daniel's horse, their words tumbling over each other with earnest apologies. Inside the cabin, the hearth blazed warm as Martha Wilson and 2 other women helped Anna prepare a simple supper. The aroma of beans simmering with salt pork filled the space, while fresh bread warmed on the stovetop. Though humble fare, it felt like a feast of celebration. "The Lord provides in unexpected ways," the preacher said, accepting a steaming bowl. His weathered face crinkled with kindness as he watched Daniel and Anna move around each other in the small space, already like father and daughter in their comfortable routine. "I reckon he does," Daniel replied softly, surprising himself with the words. Though sometimes his timing tests a man's face something fierce. The neighbors nodded, shame still fresh in their expressions. "We should have spoken up sooner, old," Jim Turner admitted, his spoon scraping the bottom of his bowl. "Ain't right. What we allowed. What matters is you found your voice when it counted most," Anna said quietly. The room fell silent, humbled by her grace. As evening deepened, Anna curled up by the hearth, exhausted but peaceful. The fire cast dancing shadows on her face as she drifted to sleep. Daniel sat in his chair, strong hands working a piece of pine wood with his knife. Shavings fell softly as he carved, each cut precise and purposeful. The preacher watched him work. "Family isn't always made by blood," he observed. "Sometimes it's built by faith and courage, one day at a time." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving the small box taking shape beneath his blade. In that moment, as snow began falling outside and friendly voices murmured around his table, the cabin felt truly blessed, a sanctuary where two lonely souls had found belonging at last. The first rays of sunlight painted the cabin's frost-covered windows in gold. Daniel sat at the rough-hewn table, turning the freshly carved wooden box in his hands. The pine still carried the sweet scent of fresh woodwork, its surface smooth from hours of careful whittling. "Anna," he called softly, his voice thick with emotion. She stirred from her place by the dying embers, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daniel held out the box, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Inside gleamed his life savings gold dust that sparkled like morning frost and coins collected over years of trapping. $3 bought you in their eyes," he said, his voice catching. "But to me, you're worth millions because you gave me back my faith." Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks as she threw her arms around his neck. "You're the father I never truly had," she whispered against his shoulder. Together, they stepped out onto the cabin's porch. The valley stretched before them, pristine and white, smoke curling lazily from their chimney into the crystal-clear sky. Fresh sleigh tracks marked the snow where neighbors had traveled home, a testament to renewed friendship. Standing side by side, they watched the horizon paint the world in glory. For the first time, both felt the truth of God's promise. This was their new beginning, built not on chains and sorrow, but on family, hope, and freedom. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.